Airways extends a very warm welcome to Oslo, with the local time coming up to 10:30 in the morning. Please kindly remain seated with your seatbelt securely fastened until the seatbelt sign has been switched on.
The Photowalk is a loading zone production.
Remember what I said last week about the sound of a still image? Listen to this. This is the sound, well, not of the whole country, but this is the sound, for the part that I'm in anyway, of Norway. Are you sure, Neil? It just sounds like hiss to me. Is your recording equipment working properly? Yes, it is. I'm right next to a waterfall, a Norwegian waterfall. Are you sure it's Norwegian, Neil? It sounds like it's got a bit of an English accent to me. No, this is, well, I don't know what river it is, actually. Should have done some homework for you. There is a sign on this amazing wooden bridge that I'll make a picture of as my opening photograph for the Photowalk this week. What does it say? Because there's a sign on it. Finnebrua. Oh, Neil, you're sounding fluent. Oh, I know. Well, it's got 1868 on it. So I'm assuming that's when the bridge was built, although there's a 1937 reference on there. Filfet til Mesna over Finne I Valga. Anybody that's listening in Norway at the moment, and we have a few Norwegian listeners I know, will be saying you've made a proper pig's ear of that, Neil. Come here, give me the microphone. Let me do it. Anyway, I'm going to walk across the bridge because the better view of this wonderful historical bridge is from the other side. I know that from the walk I did the other day when I first arrived. There we go. Let me just place my letters down here and get you a photograph of that. My opening photograph of the day. Right, I'm on the X100, which I brought away with me. Oh, it's bright. Hold on. F4.5, no, 5.6. Shutter speed 7/50th. ISO. Is it 160, Neil? How did you know? And there we go. Another one. My opening sketchbook photograph of the day.
The foreword.
A couple of other observations for you. I'm just walking up another hill, of which I'll come to in a moment. I've been saying hi to everyone I see, which is the universally accepted, cheery, happy way of saying hello. But nobody yet has said hi back. Am I saying it with the wrong inflection? And the other thing is that, well, in the UK, when you head out for your walks, you often see joggers, and there's a few here where I am, but mainly the chosen way to exercise of a morning seems to be to put some sort of skates on the bottom of your feet, and with some ski poles, will look like ski poles, and you ski uphill, which is a way during the summer months of keeping yourself fit and ready for the uphill skiing activity, which we talked about on a recent podcast. Well, don't be telling Greta, but yes, I'm on my travels again, and as I flew out of Heathrow, it struck me how the green grass of home that I always love seeing whenever I fly back into the UK looked like somebody had superimposed a very different scene. Honestly, it looked like one of my African Odyssey adventures. Anyway, this time Lillehammer for a wedding. Known for hosting the 1994 Winter Olympics and more recently the 2016 Youth Olympics, and a place I've travelled through on my way to a much calmer, altogether more suitable kind of slope for the likes of my exceptionally limited skills on skis. But as I pass Lillehammer, usually I always take a glimpse up the hill to my right or to my left on the way home, up high on the hill to the Olympic ski jump. And I was delighted to find that when I was dropped off at my hotel, that the hotel is only a walking distance from it. A challenging walking distance from it, granted, but a walking distance all the same. And on my day of arrival, I had an opportunity in the afternoon to go and photograph it. So it was super to see it close up. And actually, on it, I walked up. There's 936 steps. They call it the 936 challenge. Did you walk the whole way up next to the ski jump, Neil? Come on, be honest with us. No, I didn't. It was really hot, and I'd already yomped up a hill to get there. So I walked up part of it, but I took a chairlift for the rest. Oh, Neil, you're never going to get fit doing that. You're never going to look like a Norwegian uphill skier if that's your activity. I know. I'm trying. I really am. But standing right next to it, and hopefully my show pictures on the show page will go a little way to visually describing what a ski jump looks like in person when you're standing right next to it. But I did reach a conclusion, which I thought I had anyway. You've got to be a little bit unhinged, haven't you, in some ways, to be a ski jumper. I mean, that goes way beyond walking through a graveyard in the dark on a stormy night after watching The Omen. No, ski jumping, that's full on. Somebody needs to have serious words with your behaviour, really, isn't it? I stood at the top of the jump, looking down, and my respect level was teetering on using the word awesome. And you know me for getting upset about using the word awesome for no real reason at all. I mean, at what stage do you say to your careers teacher, you know, I've decided that a career flying fast jets is a little, well, how can we call this? Pedestrian? No, what I really need is a job where I can throw myself down a stupidly steep hill at a speed approaching 70 miles an hour in a kind of ridiculously thin suit that wouldn't protect me if a fluffy kitten were to rub up against my leg, where the chances of breaking every bone in my body is just another daily entry on the risk assessment form. That's what I need. What have you got? Well, I've got ski jumper. Perfect. Where do I sign? Norway is a beautiful country. I love it. But I'll be honest with you, I've never seen it in the flesh without a half-metre covering of snow. So this is different. I'm actually able to walk around without doing the odd shuffle of awareness that unless you're wearing spikes, you're always about to fall over. That sort of, that Bambi walk, if you will. So, scene set. After last week's second part of my walking chat with the amazing photojournalist Kieran Doherty, did you enjoy it? I hope you did. One of those most generously thought-provoking conversations. It really was. Anyway, I'm going to be making a return to the mailbag today. Some super letters and thoughts from you. Pictures, of course, for the show page to share from where you've been walking as well. And a couple of extra things to talk about. For instance, he says with a broad smile, you may have noticed a few subtle changes today as the show came through to you, unless the god or goddess of cash, spelt C-A-C-H-E, has interfered with artwork, that is. Neil, I was going to mention that. The show title seems to have become the Photowalk. See? Nothing gets by you, does it? We'll talk about that in a short while. And my guest is a good friend of this show, Pulitzer Prize winner Melissa Roth, who's been doing a Kickstarter crowdfunder as part of her One Person Crying Women and War project. She'll be going to Nepal to photograph and interview Nepali women who are war widows to the feared and fearless Gurkha regiment. Now, Marissa's project across decades has told the story of women affected by the tentacles and consequences of war. And this funding is to allow her access to women in a part of the world that has its own challenges for access. So yes, of course I want to talk to her about that. But I thought this could also be a good time to get an idea of how Kickstarter crowdfunding for the arts works. What's involved, because if there really is a project or a book or otherwise in us all, it may well be a journey of travel, quite literally, that's open to each one of us with our super creative ideas.
Today on the Photowalk.
I was covering hard news in LA for 25 years, and I have definitely some residue, probably trauma-acquired PTSD from it. I saw some pretty horrible stuff. You know, we regularly had to go out and photograph car crashes and gang shootings and everything from, fires and earthquakes. So it was a lot. You can't undo what you've seen.
Stories of life told by photographers, and today those stories come from Marissa Roth, Mark Power, Kieran Doherty and Sean Tucker, and you. It's a unique, special kind of photography podcast made from the letters you send in, the thoughts you have, the words from our special inspirational guests. Whatever you photograph with, be it your DSLR with the ability to photograph moving stuff at the speed of thought, or the big camera, as I hear pros call it when they consider it alongside their smaller X100s or their Ricos. Or of course, if you make your daily stories on a smartphone. It's not a show that will make you feel a little lost if you don't know the history of art or photography or can't pronounce, stand by, this is the Frenchman who is widely credited with inventing photography, Joseph Nicephore Niepce. Niepce? You have to have a slight on the end, apparently. It's about how we feel when we make pictures, what it does for us, what it does for others. And in the 6.6 billion people on this planet can make a picture with something, there's a lot of us about to walk with on our photo walk today. In the mailbag then, letters from corners of the world you might not expect right now. We talk about abandoned buildings. We talk about writing to go with your picture making, collecting photo books that have nothing to do with what you like to photograph. We'll be finding out in a moment about who won MPB.com's Photo and Video Kit Hall of Fame 2022 and other stories. So, shall we walk then? Checklist out, coffee and Garibaldi's packed. Check, boots on and laced. Check, walking trousers or shorts, long socks for those who walk amongst the bullet ants, or is it fire ants? All will be explained soon. Check, spare batteries, check. Memory cards or spare film, check. Earbuds in, check. Lens caps off. Let's walk. Before we get to your letters, it's nice to be back with the mailbag, by the way, and thank you for the mails, the letters that are coming in with your pictures as well. There's some superb stories to tell well into autumn and winter, but keep them coming in, please. There's a new email address that you're gonna need to get used to, although the old email address works. I'll come to that a little bit later on. Oh, Neil, that sounds cryptic. I did notice a few different things about the artwork this week, yes. Before we do all that, though, in the middle of the show, I'll have a chat about that. If you buy, sell, or want to trade camera kit and you live in America, Europe, or the UK, then MPB.com are the people who should be right at the forefront of your thoughts when it comes to gear change time. When I went back to using, and this is the first of a couple of mentions of the X100, the original X100, when I went back to using X100 series cameras, that's who I went to, MPB. When I needed some glass for the R6 cameras, MPB.com. Usually, of course, I'm telling you about the guarantees and the sustainability of buying through MPB.com. But this week, a slight change in direction. I want to do a wrap, really, on the annual Photo and Video Kit Hall of Fame that they run each year, where you vote for 5 bits of kit from 5 categories. The camera kit that you think deserves to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, that's going to be a classic for the years to come. Essentially, 5 of the most outstanding bits of kit from the digital era. And this year there was a record number of voters. So if you took part, you were part of that record number. More voters than 2020 and 2021 put together. So let's run through the winners, shall we? This year, for rugged looks and the feel of this camera alone, I think it deserves it, the Fujifilm X-T2. There are 2 bits of Fujifilm kit as winners this year, just saying. A drone, no less, in the Game Changer category. Though a drone was the game changer last year. This year, it's the DJI Mavic 3 Pro. That was the winner, a tool that's becoming so important in storytelling. I'm tempted to start using mine again. The Nikon, wherever you live in the world, however you pronounce it, Z7, the first, or their first full-frame mirrorless, which started the march to mirrorless, really, for many a Nikon user. The camera that I try not to show my X100V that I'm lusting for, careful Neil, family show, no really I am. This is the Q2, come on, the Leica Q2. If you are a street photographer, this is the, please sir, can I have some more of the camera world? And it's the first winner spot, surprisingly, that they've taken. But guess what won the big iconic category? The original, or as the kids would call it, the OG, isn't it? That's what they would say. Dad, don't use that word, doesn't suit you. The X100, not my favourite camera, the Fujifilm X100. I had a checkered history with this camera. It was awful when it came to autofocus. And there were many times almost, threw it out the window, quite literally at one stage. But it was the gateway really to my mirrorless interests, and certainly shooting with smaller cameras. So it's very worthy of its place. And that is it. That's it for another year. I was hoping to be greedy and win, because this is the prize that was on offer for somebody who'd entered and voted. The X100V, the Fujifilm X100V. I need another one for the kit bag to have two. Neil, that's greedy. Come on. Yes, I appreciate that. But alas, I was not the winner. Not this time. Was it you? If you've noticed the subtle difference in the artwork and the show name today, show news to come about that. Oh, I noticed that, Neil. Yes, some of it has cached. Some of the wrong stuff has cached. It's going to be a transitional process, our rebranding into being the Photowalk. But I don't want to say too much. That's to come later on. All will be revealed. Well, it's kind of revealed now, really. I'll tell you about it actually after part one of my conversation with Marissa Roth, a good friend of the show now, a little bit later on. Right, to the mailbag, Robin. I need a swirly TV effect. And to jump into my Batman outfit. Oh, a bit tight and uncomfortable, Neil. That'll chafe. Never too bad on a Sunday morning. Moving on. Although Robin actually does connect very nicely to the pictures on the show page today to do with this letter. And this is a letter that refers really to the last a couple of weeks, really, or the last couple of episodes, because there was a break, wasn't there, between 1 and 2 when it came to my 2-week vacation in the middle. We spoke to Kieran Doherty, the photojournalist, the incredibly gentle, wonderful photojournalist with so many stories to impart from his travels around the world and the different news stories that he's covered. And it was an absolute pleasure to talk with him. And it sounds like Sarah Moorcroft, who's our first letter, you enjoyed it as well. A very recent letter, such as the random nature of my picking process. The one you sent in months ago, that's coming up soon, I promise. But Sarah, yes, this does refer back only a couple of weeks. Dear Neil, very much hope that you had a great and relaxing break with your family. Really much deserved after keeping this listener, and I believe a few others, entertained, informed and educated. Educated? What kind of show do you think this is? We did actually have a great time, and thank you for asking. I've never been to Turkey before. It's my first time in Turkey. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Loved the food. Have come back much heavier. Side note, lots of work to do in that department, and I'm still not proud of my towel antics, but all the same. I was planning, says Sarah, to photo walk with you last Friday, with me headphones in, but time's not my own, as I'm giving a bit of moral support to my 90-year-old mother whilst my sister and family head off for their well-earned break. However, as I plug my earphones in, I had to laugh at the walk being almost exactly where I am currently staying, in Farnborough. I come to Caesar's camp in Farnborough from the other direction, thus avoiding the steep hill. What do you mean avoiding the steep hill? There was a way to do that walk without the steep hill. For reference, it was a photo walk with a big difference in that I was walking with Kieran. Most of my guests, of course, I link up with via Zoom, and we play them in during the photo walk. This was actually a photo walk with Kieran. But we started the show, and I walked him up this really steep hill. Poor Kieran. He said he sounded completely out of breath when he gave me when he sent me an email following the show. But I thought you sounded great, Kieran. But I had no idea there was actually an easier path to perhaps start the walk on. But this time, she says, I could visualise your walk very clearly due to all the walks I have actually done while staying with my mum and sister's family. Oh, the world is indeed small. I was even more astounded to hear you talking about the military training in the area. I haven't really taken much notice, despite numerous encounters with soldiers over recent years in that area. However, on this occasion, I was feeling rather raw from a conversation with my sister's lovely house guests from Ukraine. They have had to leave their home in Kharkiv, leaving behind all they know, including elderly family members and even their pet cat. You know, over the, what is it now, 6-7 months? How long is it? Oh, it's too long, however many months it is. But during this period, I've thought much about those who've had to leave their pets. And yes, there's so many other things going on, and there's human tragedy and human loss, lives lost, that is. But for many people, leaving their pets, their cats, their dogs, these are members of their family. And it's just another horrible, just sad, desperate facet of this terrible tragedy. And we'll talk more about that shortly. But yes, they're living safely with my sister's family, and they chug along okay, all things considered, except when stuff happens that triggers horrifying memories, such as the low-flying planes from Farnborough's air show that had them running downstairs in sheer terror. Then a week later, being surrounded as they walked my sister's dog by soldiers dressed in camouflage gear. Yes, as we said on that walk that I took with Kieran, that's a training area. So if you walk around that area, you may well sometimes bump into military. They appear with camouflage gear, guns and painted faces, just came out of the woods. The poor family was in tears with fear. The soldiers, obviously disconcerted, said, "It's okay, it's just training, it's all right, there's nothing to worry about." To which they replied, "It's not okay for us, we're Ukrainian." And I fear that despite their immense bravery, that sentence will sum up their lives for a long time to come, sadly. I don't often come down to Surrey, says Sarah, and I've changed my life for one in Scotland land now, but this time I'll be carrying something a bit different with me when I return home there. By the way, this is spooky. We're following each other around, Sarah. I'm doing walks in Farnborough. You're not far behind me. And then I'm heading up to Inverness for the Photowalk retreat in a couple of weeks' time. You're probably going to be there as well. Are you heading up to Inverness at all, Sarah? Oh, I just happened to be there that weekend, Neil. Ah, see, meet you in the coffee shop. Anyway, says Sarah, and going back to the Ukrainian family and also what Kieran was saying about being involved in other people's lives, photographically for him, I think that sometimes it's those unexpected conversations with people who are basically strangers, says Sarah, that can open our eyes just a bit wider and maybe give us a little more patience and understanding when engaging with other people, because you never know what is behind their life story. So much of what Kieran said was immensely powerful and resonated even more strongly because I'd so recently opened my ears to some new stories and let them touch my life. Anyway, on a lighter note, I managed to get away for a few days with my mum, her first holiday for 3 years because of that we shall not name. And these are some gentle, quiet images from our little photo wheelchair push at RSPB Ham Wall near Glastonbury, all taken with a Canon 5D Mark IV and a 100 to 400mm lens. If you're not sure what RSPB is, because you may not have that in your country, Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. My mother and father were fully signed up members, and I spent many hours in bird hides. I've talked about this before, I know. Can I talk now? Shh, no. There's a kingfisher. Any chance? Shh, no. Can I have the flask? No. Shh. I would so love to have spent time with them now in those hides. Oh, I know. Life changes, doesn't it? But thank you very much for your email and for your pictures. And the robin picture, the fantastic robin picture. See, there's that connection between mentioning Robin earlier and Robin now. See, I don't just make this thing up as I go along. There's careful planning in these ad-libs. That will be on the show page today on the website. Thanks for the really... hang on. There's a PS in here, and it has a word that we raise our eyebrows at. Thanks for the really awesome podcast. I'm older than you, and I'll use that word if I want to. Smiley and crying emojis. Oh, Sarah, we shall have to have words when we meet in the coffee shop. Also, one from Steve Anker to add to this episode that we're talking about with Kieran Doherty. The recent episode, says Steve, the intoxicating world of photojournalism was fantastic. What a great guest Kieran Doherty is. He gave of himself so freely, not a hint of ego, and completely inspiring. My wife heard some of it and was captivated by the story of blagging the airline brochure. Yeah, that was a super story. It was in the first part, wasn't it? She asked me later to tell her how his career had gone from that point on. What a genuinely fascinating guest. Desperate to hear part 2. Thank you, Neil, for the show in general and this interview in particular. Very best wishes from Steve Anker. And there were some comments left on the show page too for the episode. Here's one from Walid Al-Zuhair, who was commenting about what Kieran was saying about making the Corona Diary story during lockdown. And now beyond, actually, it's a love story. In pictures, really, for his mother and father. After seeing the Corona Diary, says Walid, I'm reminded when my son and daughter were diagnosed with COVID-19, they picked it up from work. They were both vaccinated, so the symptoms, fortunately, were very mild. I remember setting their meal trays by the doors, though, their mother sterilising the bathrooms before and after, shopping for groceries in an app, and the order getting cancelled after a couple of days. Everybody was so edgy. I didn't make a single photograph, though, of all these unique experiences. Thanks for the comment, Walid. And I wish I'd made more pictures during that period. I really do. There were things that happened during lockdown that were positive in a sense of family coming together. And I suppose being of service for each other, checking up on each other, and the days that we spent with our children. There's still the picnic bench that we drew things on each with special paints each particular lunchtime. There's things like that I wish I'd photographed. There's it's a part of the kids' historically it's part of the kids' life. Or our kids' life, and probably your kids' lives as well if you have kids. So I wish, Walid, I would have considered making some more documentary pictures during that time. But let's hear a little from Kieran, shall we? Talking about that photo story that we were talking about with Mum and Dad, and the audio recordings in particular that he made with his mother and father. These interviews that he recorded to go alongside the photographs he was making of them.
It's not really that easy to interview your parents. You know, you set the questions and they're both very different interviewees. I mean, Mum was, she was really keen to talk, or she talked a lot, about how she felt about COVID and what she thought the future was and her fears.
I felt fear, terrible fear actually, that such a thing was coming. Probably a lot of that down to age, thinking, oh my goodness, is this how we're going to go out of this world, you know.
So you had that fear, Mum, from the very first time?
Right from the beginning, yeah.
So you didn't think, but because I didn't, I thought this is just flu. When Tom came back from China, I thought this is just flu.
Oh, no, I didn't think that at all. I remember, you know, when the bird flu was coming, I was quite worried about that as well.
And Dad was, he is sometimes a man of few words, and, you know, he probably said the complete opposite to whatever Mum said.
No, I just accepted what was happening was happening, and that mine's greater than mine would know how to deal with it. I can't remember regarding it as serious, but I knew it had to be. There was so much on TV and people talking about it when you managed to get somebody to come here.
But yes, it was really interesting, but I felt I'd always wanted to do, at some point, do my own exhibition of the images. Yeah. And what I wanted was a soundscape to go behind it of all the audio bites that happened over COVID. And I also had this idea, so do you know, there were all those, I can't even remember what they were, but there were obviously sound bites that Boris said, and yes, you must stay at home, and stuff like this, interspersed with audio of my mum and dad, and you know, just to see how it would fill the space. But the whole idea was to turn the exhibition into a darkroom. So it would be, you know, I mean, can you imagine HR letting me away with this one? But you would turn the whole thing into a dark room. There would be huge red lights that would make it look like it's in a dark room, and everybody turning up. I always wanted them to be able to turn up with a torch. So all the images would sort of be hung on lines, and they would walk around with a torch, and they would study each image the same way I experienced lockdown through my enlarger. Yeah. So I would put my negative into my enlarger, and I would see this shaft of light, and this image would appear at the bottom, and I would study it and print it. And I went, okay, that's how I want people to experience these pictures. So, you know what it's like when you go to exhibitions, you look at one picture and then all of a sudden you catch the next picture. Yeah. So you sort of lose that picture and you move on to this, and then you move on to that. The idea of going in with a torch meant that you really you only saw what was in front of you.
Wonderful to hear Kieran talking again, and there are more letters in the mailbag about his 2 episodes. I have a feeling we are going to be discussing him more in the weeks to come. It's the photo walk of a Friday. Your letters, your thoughts, your pictures. And, well, you may remember that almost 2 months back I read a letter from a photographer living in Russia, one of our, well, really good friends of the past on the show. Living in Siberia. I haven't heard from him for quite a while, and clearly there's reasons for that. Now, it was always very exciting to hear from him, and it still is, I hasten to add. Though, I'm sort of aware I'm making this sound a bit like a caveat, but there's a whole new connotation to the mailbag when words come from Russia, particularly when we were talking about Ukrainian refugees, of course, a moment ago, such as the twists and turns of the mailbag at the moment. Part of me is thinking, am I supposed to even include words and letters from Russia during this time? But I have to tell you, he's really responding to questions that I had about what's happening to photography and the arts at this time in Russia. I was genuinely intrigued to know a little more about that. So I've sat on this letter for a number of weeks, but I thought you might be interested to hear his response. And it's a response from somebody who's, well, not exactly promoting the party line, as it were, in that country. Words following my intrigue on how it is being in the arts in Russia right now. Hello, Neil. I'm not the most informed in terms of what's happening in regards to arts and photography here, but here's what I do know. In terms of working photographers who are not conflict photojournalists and press photographers, everything is more or less the same as before, except for social media. A large portion of people transitioned from Instagram to a Russian platform that we have, VK, which is somewhat similar to Facebook. But some stayed on Instagram, and used VK as secondary social media. Instagram is, of course, blocked, which means less eyes on your work, since not everybody bothers with setting up a VPN, a private sort of network is what he's talking about here, so you don't get spotted and followed in terms of what you're looking at. From the arts, a lot of people who speak out publicly against the war while they left the country. That includes musicians, stand-up comedians, TV hosts, politicians, movie and theatre actors, directors, artists and painters, many gone. And you ask about what we see in the news, and from this point forward I'm not entirely comfortable attaching my name to these words, and that's why I didn't start out with, all you know is that it is a he. Yes, we see destruction. Yes, we see ruined buildings, cities almost leveled to the ground, Russian rockets being launched. But it's really from what the government-controlled media tells us, what we see on TV, what RT probably, that's Russia Today, isn't it, probably shows and tells to people outside of Russia. Well, actually not, because we don't get RT. Now, a friend of mine, many years a friend, who was a broadcaster at the radio station I initially worked at in the BBC, who worked for Russia Today, left them actually a good few moons ago, well before this. But I remember talking to him, and he said, I thank my lucky stars I'm out of that now. Their gist is everything that gets bombed is either an ammunition depot or nationalist base or some other military installation. And yes, that includes residential buildings and hospitals and schools and kindergartens and shopping malls. Cities are not conquered. He says they're occupied. They get liberated. That's what we're told. There's even some documentaries about how Ukrainians are hard right-wingers and so on. Also, there's sometimes reports from the front lines with various levels of cringeworthy imagery. His words, not mine. There was one where the cameraman walked in front of an engineer looking for mines. So, yeah, I understand why he uses the word cringeworthy. It's the narrative that's being painted, isn't it? And I'm doing my best desperately here not to sound political. But it is fascinating when you read words from people that are on the ground, and particularly this person who doesn't believe at all in what's being fed. Personally, he says, I didn't believe the state media long before this conflict started, and I'm not starting now. There's a lot of imagery, in many cases much more graphic and shocking than what state media shows, including uncensored bodies. And this is where most of the photos from international news agencies can be found. I can't say I'm completely on board with what independent and international media tells us, but I find it much more believable. And the crucial difference, they provide evidence to support the claims. And then there's Twitter, where I personally follow some people from Ukraine. Since February, the Russian government has adopted a lot of new laws, and I'm going to highlight two of them. And these laws, of course, we're aware of. The first one concerns fakes about the Russian army, dissemination of unreliable information about the armed forces and its operations, as Wikipedia puts it. In reality, basically anything that's not the official state media version of events is considered fake. Maximum sentence, 15 years in prison. The second, about discrediting Russian armed forces and operations, including the calls for prevention of the use of Russian armed forces for the interests of the Russian Federation. Another Wikipedia quote there, actually. This is the one that gets people fined or thrown into prison for calling aforementioned events war, or removing the letters Z and V, the symbols from various spots. And lately, even using the phrase special operation in quotation marks. That can get you into a lot of trouble. Recently, quite a few people have been accused of treason. I think something like 4 to 5 in the last couple of months, which is unusually many. So this is the situation I and many others find ourselves in. Yes, I've held the identification, but thank you so much for your letter. You know, this show is listened to in the literal 4 corners, and the idea has always been that we walk together, share together, make pictures together, read, of course, your thoughts about the shows that you hear, what's been said, to hear your experiences around the world, personal and photographic. It is certainly it is a privilege. Not always the nicest privilege when you hear stories like this, but it is. So I do want to thank those who've written in on this particular subject, and of course some letters that we've not been able to use for reasons of, I know, you fearing being exposed. So thank you sincerely for taking the time to write in. And of course, let's hope this madness, absolute madness, ends as soon as it possibly can. If you'd like to send your thoughts into the show, indeed your pictures as well, 2,000 pixels on the wide, not on the long side. I used to say that, wide, 2,000 pixels wide. Come on, Neil, remember, yes. And we'll pop them on the show pages as your letters get read. And don't forget to send me links to your Instagram or any other social media, your website, and so on, so that we can link back to what you've been making, which is a joy. There's a new website URL. You might have noticed the old URL still works though, and it will do for months, possibly years to come. But we are in the middle of this rebranding to call it the Photowalk. But I'll tell you more about that shortly. There'll be a new email address. You might as well write it down. Do you want to write it down? Yes, please, Neil. I'd like to write it down. Okay. stories@photowalk.show. stories@photowalk.show. The old email address will still work, though. Do not fear. There's a lot of history tied up in that particular one. Right, time to hear from my guest for the first time today, Marissa Roth. Now, we have spoken with Marissa before on a couple of occasions. I think it's nice, actually, when guests do come back. I mean, it's a community. I mean, you and I are here week after week, so sometimes it's nice to hear guests return, and so it's always a joy to chat with Marissa, a Pulitzer Prize winner for her photojournalism, which she won for her part in the LA Times stories for the coverage of the infamous LA riots back in the early 90s. Her work has taken her around the world, quite literally, covering social, political, cultural subjects, and of course I've spoken with her about her absolute love for Tibet, plus the personal projects that percolate through her photographic mind and being. But today I want to return to a story that defines much of her work and experiences for nearly 4 decades, and addresses how women in sadly numerous countries and cultures have been directly affected by war and aftermath. And I appreciate that's the sort of tone of the start of the show today. One Person Crying, Women and War is a story that we have talked about, but now there's a new part of it in the planning, which Marissa is hoping to fund through a Kickstarter campaign, which we're going to talk about today as well. Plus, I am intrigued genuinely by Kickstarters and crowdfunding, because it's the method by which so many stories and books, expeditions and adventures, and we've talked about a couple who've had Kickstarter funding behind them. And I thought you might like to know a bit more about it too, because I know that there are more than a few of us in our community who have possibly paused to say, I wonder whether that's a route for me. So without too much of a spoiler, because the story ends slightly differently with Kickstarter, we get honest about the crowdfunding exercise and how that works and how it's worked out for Marissa on this particular occasion. So then today, my guest, part 1 of my chat now with Marissa Roth. Marissa, I try to keep up with where you call home, because it has danced between the UK and the US. You are a prolific traveller at times as well. Where is home? Where would you lay your hat, as the famous song goes?
So actually, home is officially London. And I spent a long time trying to leave America, and I was fortunate enough to be granted a global talent visa by Arts Council England last year. And with the pandemic and still everything and everyone in flux, I wasn't quite certain how to sort of commence everything. And after a lengthy trip back to the US last fall, I returned to London last November, found a flat, and now I'm here. And it's an interesting thing because this week, in a strange way, feels like my true life in London is beginning and in England. I was traveling, as you said, I'm on the road. I did 5 international trips from March to June, like an insane human being. Mostly, it was all for work. I had to go back to LA to prepare my Women in War show to be seen a few weeks later in New York and then again in Serbia. So I was kind of settling, but my mind was not settling because I was all over the place. Yeah, all of a sudden it feels like this is home. And a lot of my projects are going to be starting with the Royal Geographical Society and other institutions. So officially, as of this week, I am a Londoner.
Now, you mentioned LA, actually, and it's the 30th anniversary of the LA riots this year.
Yes,
which you found yourself covering. It was work that won you a Pulitzer as part of the LA Times staff. What do you remember from that time?
Wow. Well, I remember it was tense, intense, fraught, frightening. But I think the deepest memory that I have, and something that really changed me forever, there was one moment I was out photographing on the second day of the riots, watching looters going from this huge grocery store called Ralph's, sort of running across this huge boulevard to this huge, everything in America is huge, like sort of, drugstore. And the police were in a passive stance. They were standing there with their arms on their hips because they didn't want to provoke it. Plus they were outnumbered. I photographed all of the photographers. We were photographing everything. And I was photographing mothers pushing babies in baby strollers who were looting Sony Walkmans and paper towels. And it was just this kind of mad free-for-all. I remember thinking to myself, and this is the thing that has stayed with me, and I thought, my God, the line between anarchy and civilization is really, really, really thin. And it can just blow in a second. And I think that was pretty traumatic revelation. Growing up in LA, it was, we had our issues, of course, in the 60s and 70s, the assassinations of the Kennedys and Martin Luther King and all the civil unrest around, on the campuses around the anti-war movement. And in Los Angeles, we had the earlier riots. I think they were in 1968 or 69. I can't remember. So it was never peaceful. But I still felt cocooned, I suppose. And, and yet witnessing firsthand, it was shocking, because I realized if LA can blow, any place can blow. Fortunately, safety was restored. The National Guard was called in. The police chief at the time, who was a real provocateur and not loved, and he actually fomented a lot of the anger through the police department, Daryl Gates. He was shortly thereafter forced out. So that helped to also restore a kind of a sense of calm. But the police are still not loved. There's a lot of racism within the police department. So it was a tragedy. It was sad. It could happen again very easily. When I go back to LA now, I sense there's still undercurrents of anger, racism, although I think it would probably be a Latino thing the next time, so the divisions of wealth. So who knows? I don't want to be there when it goes again.
Well, that was going to be my next question. As a photojournalist, is it the sort of story? You must have watched Black Lives Matter, of course, and all the coverage of that from the photographers who had, I think, very mixed opinions over how they were treated during that time by the police as much as anything. Whether you're tempted to go and continue that story, but I see your head shaking and know that the answer will be no.
Well, I'm at a different age and a different phase in my life. I have different stories to tell within me. I was covering hard news in LA for 25 years, and I have definitely some residue, probably trauma-acquired PTSD from it. I saw some pretty horrible stuff. We regularly had to go out and photograph car crashes and gang shootings and everything from, fires and earthquakes. So it was a lot. You can't undo what you've seen from your mind's eye. And again, I feel like my work in LA is done. I covered Hollywood for 30 years. I have a wonderful body of work there, which will eventually be a book. But no, I moved on to other stories. The Women and War Project is very near and dear to me. And also I'm on the cusp of starting to do a lot here in London in terms of photography. I'll be working in conjunction with the Royal Geographical Society on their photography collection, which is very exciting. And also I'm curating now, and I'll be curating a retrospective on Frank Hurley, who was the photographer on board the Endurance expedition.
Yeah.
So I'm not one to look back. I'm one to look into the near future. And for me, my joy and my passion and my fuel is kind of what's in front of me and what I can create and interpret now.
Well, the story that is in front of you, but is also very much behind you, because it's been running for almost 40 years now, is One Person Crying, Women in War, which you mentioned a moment ago. And we're that close to the 4-decade mark in this project, aren't we? What are we, 1 year out, 2 years out?
2 years out.
2 years out. I mean, it's an important conversation when you consider our chat today, and I want to revisit the reasoning behind this enormously challenging topic. And you're the author of it. You're better placed to tell me what it was that you found that had you embark on this incredible project.
Yeah, I think I would call it an odyssey.
An odyssey.
Although Odysseus's odyssey only lasted 20 years. So, I'm almost double.
You've gone double, yeah.
Yeah, I almost doubled his journey. So when I initially sort of started it, in those days, I was, a hardcore photojournalist, and it was a side of war, the women's side of war, that I felt was underreported. And I kept stumbling onto stories while I was doing other stories that gave me access to tell, the Afghan women in Pakistan. I was involved in a medical airlift to Albania during the bombing of Kosovo. But it was really a focused agenda, if you will, which was to tell these stories. I didn't really understand probably or realize for 20 years, if you will, that it was also personal, that it really harkened back, and probably the seeds and the roots of it was my own family's very tragic Holocaust history. Yeah. My parents were Holocaust refugees. They were wise and had great vision, and chose to leave Eastern Europe in October of 1938, right before the curtains dropped.
So these are the women that are left behind, but they don't have to be the wives. It's the mothers, it's the daughters.
Yes, and sometimes the trauma goes down generations.
Yeah.
The burden of it, the trauma of it. And now there's a field of, I think, psychological study called epigenetics, which actually studies if trauma, like war trauma, actually changes DNA from the stress, from the hormone changes, from the physiological changes, if that actually can be transferred down into the next generation.
Well, you've called it an essay, although now you've called it an odyssey. So I'll have to remember that.
They both end in Y.
They do. But this is like a never-ending odyssey, as you said. It's 40 years now, and we're about to add to that, obviously, with the next part of the story, which I'll come to. But you were talking about turning this into a book. But I wonder when the right moment comes, because knowing you'll think, oh no, I think I'll go on another 10 years with it. Is there a right moment to release this as a book?
Well, so I hope it's not never ending. I hope to finish it. And I've thought it was finished at different times. I thought it was finished in 2009 when I was in Novi Sad a second time and found a memorial with my grandparents' names on it. But then that wasn't quite the end. And then I thought it was done in 2019 when I went to my great-grandmother's hometown in Romania. And my mind that day was the finale of the project. So basically, there's a new phase is just opening up. Actually, 2 new phases on the project are opening up. In addition to my continuing subjects, I'm now working with a producer to create a documentary series based on the project. I promise it'll finish. So we're in the process of writing. He's in the process of writing what's called the pitch deck, which is what he will present to different studios. and basically to take the project outward. Unfortunately, tragically, the Ukraine war has, I think, opened up people's eyes to the women's side of war much more and more. A lot of that has been featured. And so I feel, in a way, my project finally is very relevant in now. So the plan is to do 8 to 10 episodes, going to different former war zones, somewhere I've been where there's still some women who I've probably interviewed in the past who are still alive, and then go to other places. Unfortunately, there's still many of them. And also I'm in the process of setting up a one-person crying foundation. I just don't want this project to be exhibitions in a book. I actually want to carry the message forward and create, symposiums where women from different countries can actually come together and talk about their experiences or whatever they want to talk about. And this idea has been on my mind for years. And it was really born from something that I was doing during the project. So often, when I would go to meet women in a new country or situation, I would take some of the photographs from my previous trips and show them as a means of explaining what the project was and is. So I had women in Northern Ireland looking at photographs of Afghan women in Pakistan and Japanese women in Hiroshima. And the response was always the same, like, oh my God, they had the same experience I had. And there was a woman in Londonderry, Charlotte Russell, who was Protestant, whose husband was killed by an IRA sniper when she was pregnant. And she gave me the key, in a way, to the whole project. This was 2005. And she said that I bet you're finding that women are the same everywhere. So somehow the idea to create these forums, symposiums, this foundation, to keep it going forward. So eventually, yes, the book will be done.
Well, you mentioned Ukraine, which is interesting because, of course, never. I would imagine for many people, never have they felt it more on their doorstep. I don't mean physically, in terms of the miles between us and the front line, as it were, right. But the fact that we have people now in our communities closer to us than ever that are telling their stories. Is that going to be one of them?
Absolutely. I will go to Ukraine. I don't know when, and I don't know yet what story I'll tell there. I'm interested in the story, if it's safe enough, to get the story as women and families are coming back, sort of right at that pivotal moment from being refugees to coming back. So it's a story I'm interested in telling, just as the story about the Nepalese women, which I know we're going to talk about. Is another story that I feel is important.
And I wonder, actually, I'm not sure, you talk about the long story in this, the Russian story would be interesting as well. Behind Putin's protective veil of censorship, I would imagine would be almost impossible at the moment. But in the future, to be able to talk with the mothers and the wives of the Russian soldiers that didn't come back.
Yes, and there's thousands of them. It's interesting, the Washington Post just released a story yesterday. So apparently a Russian soldier has decided to completely share the experience of what it's been like in Ukraine. Wow. And it's horrible from his perspective. I can email you the article. It's so shocking, the conditions that they've been in. The weaponry has been faulty. They've had to scrounge for food. And he's basically put this out on sort of like the equivalent of Russia Facebook. Who knows what they know. But yes, that would definitely be a story, if possible.
We'll come to the Gurkhas in a moment, as a community as much as a regiment. But I do have a couple more questions, though, generally about the project. I'm fascinated how you establish a trusting relationship as a photographer with these women whose stories are so personal and often so harrowing. And I've heard this phrase, and I'm not sure how comfortable you'll feel with it, where photojournalists talk to me about this sort of discomfort they have themselves of effectively parachuting into a situation, getting the story, then leaving again. And I wonder how that works with this incredible trust that you have to build up.
Yes, I think certainly when I was working as a photojournalist, I felt that all the time. And not necessarily doing heavy-hearted stories, but just stories in general. And I would often be frustrated because I didn't have time to linger, to peel more than one layer off, so to speak, the onion of the story, if you will. And I think in many ways that informed my behavior with the Women in War Project, where I can spend days or hours with someone. But I think also it's not just parachuting in and out, but it's also how you interact. I mean, when I meet a woman, I'm pretty open, and I'm a pretty open person in general. And I like to say I travel with an open heart and an open mind.
I know. I like that expression.
But I come also with compassion, and I also share some of my own family stories. People are sensitive to who you are. You don't always need to speak. They can tell if you're aggressive or a bully, or you're just kind of flip about it, or if you're really sincere and tender. I mean, people tell me their life stories on trains, on planes. I don't know. I think maybe I have like the demeanor of a listener or a psychologist. People share stuff with me. I mean, when I was doing the portrait series of Holocaust survivors at the Museum of Tolerance, a number of male survivors told me things that they hadn't even told their wives.
Wow.
And a number of them actually broke down with me, which was really interesting. So I don't know. I think, again, I transfer trust, or they feel comfortable, because I sincerely want to know who they are, what they've been through. I come with sincerity. And I will spend the time. I mean, a German woman I met in Berlin, she was a child during the war, and she literally didn't stop speaking for 6 hours. It was like no one had asked her to recount her war experience for her entire life. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. But I mean, I think the project is a very different experience and raison d'etre than parachuting in and out as a journalist. So yeah.
And Marissa Roth returns shortly with part 2 of the story today. Right, shall we talk about this change of show name? Whilst being aware I don't want this to be too self-indulgent, but I talked about this with the patrons last week in the Moore show, so I felt that we should really have a little chat ourselves about it as well. So, the show name has changed. That seems to be obvious, I think, if you look at the artwork today. But there's still a few caching problems. So whereas we were Photography Daily, we are now the Photowalk, officially. Well, we have been for quite a while, actually. We just haven't called ourselves it. So it takes, I'm told it takes a few days, but I think on this particular occasion, it might take a couple of weeks to gradually, is the word percolate, or work its way through the system. That might be just an adequate, just as adequate a phrase. So that's ongoing at the moment. For a while, I've been umming and erring, really, like a proper gold medalist ruminator over whether to make the change. But I have, and I've written an elevator pitch thought process as to why we've become the Photowalk as a show. And keeping on theme, first floor. See, I told you it was an elevator pitch process. It stopped being a daily show a long time ago. When I went back to work and make and take photographs for the main part of my income. Would you believe it? But the British government actually want me to repay my COVID business support loan? How very inconsiderate. Second floor. The Photowalk does what it says on the tin title. It really is. We're out there taking and making photos. And I'm walking as I record the show. It's photos and a walk. A photo walk. Third floor. I'm trying to work on the marketing of this title, I really am, and just like the point as we pass the second floor in this elevator pitch, I seem to spend far too long trying to explain to people I talk to why it's not daily. Marketeers and journalists are not known for their patience when they don't instantly grab an idea, so hopefully it should help a little bit. It's not as complex or complicated or difficult to explain is probably the correct or the correct words I'm looking for. Fourth floor. I couldn't help feeling, and advice from bigger brains than me also said this, that Photography Daily sounded a little bit, oh, is that a crow? You're a long way from home. We have them here, you know. Oh, right, okay. I couldn't help feeling that Photography Daily sounded a little bit too mid-shelf magazine, the place only aficionados of a subject go to for their information. And being approachable, I think, is really important. I'll give you an example. This is a long floor, by the way. The elevator pitches. The elevator has slowed right down. I love the Cinema podcast. I'll just say it. I love the Cinema podcast for this reason. It was a conversation two people had while they walked a mile to the local cinema. They'd watch it, they'd walk a mile back, they'd talk about it. Cinemile. Cinema, Cinemile. Love it. Does what it says on the tin. And you didn't have to be a film buff or anything like that. You just needed to like taking the odd movie in. And that's really what I think about the Photowalk. You don't have to be an absolute expert in terms of knowing the art of photography or indeed the history of the art of photography. You just need to like taking pictures and be on a walk. Did you hear that? I think nature is conspiring. Please don't keep doing that. You gave me proper jump then. Fifth floor. It's about time I made this easier for wonderful people like you, and I genuinely mean this, to share it. And I think clarity of title may well help. Sixth floor. Looky, we've arrived. So there we go. That was am I good at elevator pitches? No, Neil, that was dreadful. It's too long. Oh, okay. I was doing my best. So what changes, Neil? Anything? What about the assignment show? Not much really in terms of creativity and sound, no. I think the show's found its feet some time back, really. Very naturally, very organically across the last year in particular. It was, the Photowalk this is, and now is, the edition that has the highest take-up in terms of response and interest. The letters I read which talk of the mental health benefits of being out there with a camera, they say to me very strongly indeed that this unique kind of show, this relationship even that we've found together works. So, no, I really don't want to change anything at all. There'll be a little short-term pain on the website because though that's changed to the new name, which was decided as photowalk.show, some of the internal links on the episode pages, and there's over 300 of these, will need editing. That will be addressed in the coming months. But Squarespace generally have made this nice and easy. And photographydaily.show has not gone anywhere, and it will simply just forward on through to photowalk.show. As I say, the email studio@photographydaily.show will work. So if that's what you have at the moment, and that's what you're using to contact the show with your wonderful pictures and your stories and your adventures, fabulous. There is a new email address, as I say, and that will be stories@photowalk.show. So that's the one to start using. I wonder who's going to be the first. I'm hoping, he says, that everything now is on the tin like, and that's it. That's the show news. Lots, I think, to get excited about, and I've chosen to do it in a week when I've just returned from Norway, shooting 4 additional weddings in 7 days, and preparing myself to go away on it's a kind of an expedition, isn't it? Next weekend, on the next Photowalk retreat, which I'm thoroughly looking forward to, which is going to be in Inverness. You'll find the Insta has changed, though the name hasn't yet. There's a few twitchy name changing processes happening. The Facebook group name has changed. And patrons who are such a, also as Twitter, yes, patrons who are such a special part of this show, you'll note that has changed its title to the Photowalk, or Photowalk The Extra Mile. I've always considered that patrons have gone and still go to, they go the extra mile to make sure that this show is produced and it's here and it stays here. And you're so generous, and I really do appreciate it. It does make all the difference. The show would not be here without you, and I mean that. So from today, the extra mile will be the additional diary show. Instead of us calling it more, we're just going to call it the extra mile. I'm going to go the extra mile for you because you go the extra mile for me. Right. I need a lie down on a quiet bench somewhere here. This country made of hills, none of which seem to go downwards, apart from the ski jump or the runs, but don't let that get in the way of a good yarn. So shall we take some inspiration? Yes, please, Neil, from a former guest and very good friend of the show. From the days because it was once upon a time Breathe Pictures, yeah, to the days of Photography Daily during the lockdowns that carried on into the start of 2021, and now as the Photowalk. Here's some inspiration from the motivational and philosophical YouTuber Sean Tucker, way back from episode 7. And he's talking about making a decision to be different, to be authentic in many ways. And it's his inspiration that fired me up to make sure this podcast was something different, that it featured you as much as anyone else. It took a little while, but I think we got there. So here's Sean Tucker.
When I started in photography, I went to YouTube like everybody else does to learn skills and teach yourself, which is great. You can do that today. It's amazing. And I was often really disheartened by watching YouTubers who, most of their video ended up being a marketing tactic of look how great I am, look how much success I have and all the clients that want to work with me, and then a month later you'd see they disappeared because they went bankrupt. I'm like, oh, you were lying. You were just saying stuff because the whole point of you making videos was to show off about how great you are. And how discouraging that was to me, trying to teach myself, going, well, if this guy's doing this and he's got so many clients, what's wrong with me? Why can't I make this work? And I made a choice that I would never make videos like that I would be as honest about where it's not working and failing, and how little work I actually get in as a photographer, and how it's a constant struggle. Even if I have a YouTube channel that's working, it's still a struggle and still difficult to make things work. And the one guy who stands out, I think, was Zach Arias, who the tone of his videos felt a bit different to me, and he was someone I latched onto earlier. And there was a video he did for Scott Kelby's channel, I think, called Transform.
This the one where he said, I'm moving 1,000 miles down, I can't remember it's such a beautiful quote, but I can't remember it.
Yeah, and it's sort of very ambient, lots of sort of B-roll and voiceover, and it was very, very honest about how it wasn't working for him. And I thought that video made an impression on me, and I always wanted to be at least that honest and say where it wasn't working, because I think if I'm genuinely not just trying to show off about the fact that I think I'm a good photographer and I'm trying to help people, because I think that's what a lot of people do on YouTube, is they've got this veil of I want to educate people, but it's mostly about promoting themselves, and I didn't want to fall into that trap. So I'm very deliberate about being honest about where things are difficult, or where my work didn't meet my own standards or other people's standards, or where money was tight, or because then it encourages people to know that the difficulties in their journey are everyone's. There's safety in numbers. We can just keep going together, and then I think I am more likely to help.
And my thanks to Sean Tucker. He did actually give me some YouTube advice for a possible channel dedicated to this show, rather than my personal YouTube channel, which is, I was going to say a mess. I don't mean a mess, a mass of different films. It's not very, what's the word I'm looking for? Not very cohesive, yes. So I think its own dedicated channel, Photowalk channel, would be fantastic, and they're the kind of things that I think I can do now that we've rebranded and brought this all into line as one understandable thing. Right, if you want to be an extra miler, since we were talking about the podcast patrons just a moment ago, and the Extra Mile show, which is now the Saturday Diary show, I'm going to consider you the extra milers. I like that. And if you want to be an extra miler, then just follow the orange support the show button on the website. Right, back to your letters. Mark Creamer was replying to my suggestion last week with a mail here that I was getting bitten by bullet ants on holiday, as per usual. I think I was being overly dramatic with what I thought I'd seen on my trails. They clearly weren't bullet ants. Hi, Neil. I worried at the thought of your family being anywhere close to bullet ants. Hopefully you meant fire ants. Bullet ants have the unfortunate distinction of inflicting the single most painful sting of the insect world. But they're found in the Central American and Amazon regions, not Turkey. Fire ants, on the other hand, are found throughout the world, including many places humans like to vacation, and are quite unpleasant to come into contact with. By the way, the piece with Sir David Attenborough's voice last week was hilarious. Glad to have you back in one piece. Well, I'm glad to be back in one piece too, and not bitten by bullet ants. Just little nicks from the fire ants then. Clearly. Mark Creamer, he says, from Mark Creamer in beautiful, we only have kinder, gentler ants, Ohio. I'm sure you do. I did look up, actually, a picture of fire ants, and yes, you're right, Mark. These were the ones that I found on my legs. Bullet ants look horrible. Look at them. I tell you what, look up bullet ant online. And these things, I mean, they're about an inch long. The one that was, or the ones on our legs were not 1 inch long. And they didn't have heads that looked like they've come out of Sigourney Weaver's Alien films. Because these things do, the bullet ants that is, they look horrible. Oh, so no, they definitely weren't bullet ants, and yeah, put that down to me being proper drama. But I did do some reading up on them. Why is it called a bullet ant? Because the feeling of being stung supposedly simulates the pain of actually being pierced by a bullet. That is how painful these things are. The Satermaua people from the Amazonian basin of Brazil, though, they use bullet ants in a rite of passage ritual for manhood and social status, in which young men must place their hands in giant woven basket-like gloves filled with 100 or so of these inch-long ants. The bullet ant sting is believed to not only turn the boy into a man, but to give the young hunter better sight for his prey. They are braver men than me. I tell you what, if I want better sight, I shall go to the opticians or optometrists, depending upon where you are in the world. Or as we say in the UK, bitten by a bullet ant, should have gone to Specsavers. Right, here's a letter from, thank you very much, Mark, for your letter. Theodore Stanner next. Hello again, Neil. I'm attaching 8 photographs of my Photowalk on, there's a pronunciation here, Acero. Acero? Yes, last week, while listening to you and Alex Soth. That was episode 290. Great episode as always, with nice insights from Alex. Sorry, I've been sitting on this letter for a while. I can actually recommend everybody follow his YouTube channel, where he deep dives into photography books. I must admit, I haven't taken a deep dive myself yet through the 1 hour, 30-minute films that he has. But one in particular did strike me, where he shows how a prison study of one of Eggleston's photographs in his Democratic Forest book led one inmate into an entirely different set of thoughts and brought out a lot of strong feelings from his past. I'll link to the video, actually, because it is a fascinating film. It's called Emotional Marginalia. It's on the show page today. Back to the photographs that I'm sending. When I take my walks, says Theodore, I'm usually in exploratory mode, as I guess most of us are. Most of the time, I don't go out with a particular topic in mind. I just really go out and see what happenstance throws at me. I think that's certainly the way that I work, Theodore, when I'm making my photo walks. In this case, I was actually looking for photographs towards assignment number 1, Sean Tucker's Photograph Like a Historian. But I find it quite interesting how it turned into a story of the passing of winter, with my discovery of a ski slope 20 minutes drive from my home in Stockholm, Swedenland, in a residential area. Yeah, the picture's on the show page. It was funny, wasn't it, that you've... It's really, really close to you, but you've never seen it before. Although I suppose in many respects it's just another ski slope. It would be different, of course, here in the UK. As a potential piece that really inspired me, to lead to an inspirational moment on a future episode of the podcast. Should you so decide to weave the episode wherever you feature this message, I was recently re-listening to your conversation with Mark Power, the Magnum photographer, of course, and this was episode 272. It was very interesting to hear him speak about his practice of ordering photo books, which are entirely unrelated to his own photographic style or area, as a way of challenging himself and a source of potential inspiration. And I think that's a really good subject. You're absolutely right about that. I have now, I'm very lucky that many of the photo books that I have in my collection are books that I came by through particular circumstances, a circumstance of being beautifully gifted this just incredible opportunity to see the world in photographs and genres I would probably not have otherwise chosen myself or thought to purchase. So I know what you mean when you look at books that don't necessarily have anything to do with the genres that you're most interested in. It is a great part of your education in seeing, that is. Finally, a suggestion for a future guest on the podcast, YouTuber and photographer Matt Day. While he does have quite a decent following already, I think his videos about mostly film, photography, and in particular his honesty in front of the camera deserve introducing him to any photographers not following him already. I'm also sure it'd make a great conversation for everyone to hear. I've gone off and I've looked at Matt's work, and I'll be dropping him a line. All the very best from it's Teddy, but he said, you pronounce it in your own unique way, please. Yes, when I got your mail all those months ago, and I read it as was practically a year ago now, wasn't it? Theddy. I don't know. I mean, we have people from, as I say, all four corners of the world, and so pronunciations. Well, I do my best, you know. I do. I often go. I make a habit of going online to try and find out how things are said. I couldn't find easily that tribe earlier that I was talking about for the Amazon, for example. So going by some other Amazonian names, I kind of guessed my way into that pronunciation. But it is Teddy, I know. It's not. It wasn't written in the way. It wasn't spelt in the way that I was expecting. Hence me saying Teddy. Anyway, let's play a little of that show. He says, trying to get himself out of a corner here, of that show you mentioned where I met Mark Power in Brighton for a chat, and we talked about his passion for collecting photo books.
To be honest, Neil, when I first became a photographer, I thought foolishly that I shouldn't know anything about the history of photography, because I thought that would mean that I would start being derivative and start copying other people. So I knew very, very little about the history of photography right back then, and looking back at the work I was making, it shows. And then I had this revelation that I really needed to understand what had gone before, otherwise I felt like I was reinventing the wheel. So I started to do a lot of reading about the history, and particularly about the history rather than theory books, certainly at the beginning. But then when I started teaching photography at the university level in 1992, which was only, well, I say only, it was 10 years after I decided to become a photographer, I became a university lecturer. And of course, at that point, I had to start thinking about all of this. I had to start reading more so that I could try to stay one step ahead of the students, and that was challenging. And since then, I've become an avid photo book collector, and I still, do a lot of reading, and I look at a lot of contemporary work. So, influences, to go back to your question, are many and varied, and I think I'd like to put it the other way around slightly, that when I start a new project, it's usually because I'm looking at a particular kind of work at that time. So when I started the shipping forecast, for instance, I was looking at people like Tony Ray Jones and Chris Killip and the much underestimated Raymond Moore, who made a lot of wonderful work up in the northwest of England, sadly no longer with us. Nor is Tony Ray Jones, nor is Chris Killip, actually. So they've all gone. I think they were the people I was looking at, and then I was also looking at Martin Parr, but he was working in colour by the time I really discovered him.
Mark Power, and I shall link to his episode in the show notes today. Welcome to the Photo Walk, officially the first week of the podcast being called the Photo Walk, even though we've known the episode as the Photo Walk for a long time now. So please keep sending in your wonderful stories, your pictures, and your poems as a link to getting to this next feature. Stand by. Neil's going to attempt to read poetry. Oh no, please, Neil. I'll do my best for you, or in particular, I'll do my best for Mark Krajnak in New Jersey. Marissa Roth is back in a moment with her concluding part of the story about her journey to Nepal to photograph the women whose sons and husbands, brothers, fathers, grandfathers went to conflict as members of the Gurkha regiment and Gurkha community. So Marissa back in a moment. A letter then here from Mark Krajnak in New Jersey, which is one that's about taking pictures, but it's also about saying what you see in the picture, which to me sounds like probably a good assignment sometime. Wink, wink. Right, from Mark. Hello, Mr. James. That's very formal. Do you work for the government? Have you come visiting with an Aston Martin, an ejector seat? Greetings from my little corner of New Jersey. Imagine my surprise when out on my morning walk listening to episode 290 when I heard you mention my comment about photographing abandoned places but adding a dash of flash fiction to my photos. I am very fascinated about abandoned places, and I know I've talked about my I am a little bit jittery around abandoned places. Far too much imagination flowing from watching. I quite like, this is going to be a very strange analogy, but bear with me. Go with me on this one. I work quite late into the evening. Often I work quite late into the evening. I'm an early riser and sometimes quite late as well. Neil, when do you sleep? I do sleep. But there's just so much to do and see and hear, isn't there? So into the evenings when I'm editing pictures and sometimes piecing this show together, I like to watch classic horror. Now, I know classic horror sometimes. Well, as far as the visual effects go, it's nowhere like films like Ghastly Saw. And films like that. No, I know it doesn't keep up with the visual effects, but mentally, psychologically, some of the classic horrors. Now, I liken them to the experience of having a particularly hot curry in a restaurant where they know how to make a particularly hot curry. And I do like a lot milder, actually, Giles, my friend, would tell you, a lot milder curries. But on the occasions where I think, I'm going to challenge myself here a bit, if you bring out a proper file or something, when it's made by a chef who really knows how to make a dish like that, I'll see it as a challenge, and I'll get all my way through. And it's a bit like that when I watch classic psychological horror. Anyway, why was I saying that? Oh yes, abandoned places. Yeah, that's why, as much as I'd love to visit abandoned places, and I think they make terrifically interesting stories, the history within them and the history that you find. Sometimes you find corners of the house that that feels like they were alive just the day before. Anyway, that's why I have problems going into abandoned places, because my imagination is working like I'm eating a foul curry. I hope that analogy worked. Is it a metaphor or analogy? Anyway, back to Mark. Yes, let me explain. I'm a big fan, he says, of the film noir genre. The look, the styling, the attitude, the bleakness. I've done a good number of conceptual photo shoots that emphasise the look and feel of old noir films, and at some point I started to add my fiction to the picture by way of writing and long captions. I have to say, Mark, they certainly have a sense of the poetry around them. I think this arose, says Mark, because A, I have a background in creative writing as well as journalism, and B, I have many friends who are writers, and I've actually contributed photos to be used as cover photographs in their books. The part of New Jersey that I live in had, a lot of abandoned farms and barns and garages, and I go in to explore them and then go back to set up a photo shoot at a later time. I used to laugh, though, that I always seem to get these photo shoots done just before the bulldozers arrive. I go back a few weeks later and the place is levelled. You're like the Grim Reaper of buildings, Mark. Quick! Mark's coming. Put a protection order up. I've been blogging since 2008, so there are a few examples that you can find. I tell you what, though, let me put one particular link that you've sent on the show page, and I do like your writing that goes with the noir pictures, and it is entirely inspiring me for this new. Is this the new website, Neil, that's coming for your business? Yes. The new website where I want to do some poetry. And I want to do some soundscapes and stuff like that. Let me read one that goes with the story called Friday Noir, and hopefully, I hope I'll do it justice, but you might think, that sounds interesting, I'm going to go look at this. It's called Find Your Own Sins, which is just this superb contrasty black and white with a cat-in-a-hat bloke looking through what used to be a window opening, enveloped by his cigarette, or cloaked, let's be poetic, cloaked by his cigarette smoke. Mark writes, night begins to overtake the day, twirling like the dress of a Spanish dancer. Our course was plotted long ago. Now, like the ancients, nothing will cause to sway that course. This we cannot change. For better or for worse, this is the game that we're in. Not the normal, not the conventional. There's no escaping this burden, this beast, the feel of the night, the sweet, bitter taste of this life. The game is rigged, yes, but we cannot lose if we do not play. Well, if you want to see the picture that goes with these words, then visit today's show page, and everything will come together. I'm very fond of writing, and I talk a little bit about the creative release that writing as well as photography can bring in tomorrow's first Extra Mile edition, now that we call it the Extra Mile instead of More. It's the same diary show, just rebranded. For my extra milers, the Extra Mile. Right, let's return to Marissa Roth for part 2 of my conversation about her projects and this trip to Nepal, and also Kickstarter. When we set up the conversation, I should say that the Kickstarter had not long been running. So the outcome to the Kickstarter is something that we discuss within this second part of our chat. Here's Marissa Roth. Marissa, let's talk about the Gurkhas as a regiment, as a community. What drew you to this story as one person crying moves into this or these next stages?
Well, this is a story I've been actually hoping to address probably for 10 years since I really learned about them. And I feel it's another side of the war story that is really invisible, if you will. But, the consequences of war has tentacles that can reach halfway around the world. Mm. And certainly, because this is a UK-based regiment, obviously that they're more known here, but most people haven't even heard of the Gurkhas. So again, I've been in Nepal quite a few times. And so I don't know, I've been trying to tell this story and couldn't get access or figure out how to get my access point into a way, in. And I was having lunch at my favorite Italian restaurant here in London in January, and sitting in my little corner where I always sit. And there was a table next to me of two elderly couples, and very substantial men, and one of them definitely looked former military to me. And his other friend asked him about a book he was writing, and he starts talking about it. And then all of a sudden he says Gurkhas. And I had a very slightly aggressive, politely aggressive American moment. And I said, excuse me, but hi, and this is what I am, this is what I'm doing, and I am very interested in the Gurkha story for my project. And he was such a lovely man. And he said, well, give me your card, and I know everybody at the Gurkha Welfare Trust. By the time I got home, he had already made an introduction to the director. So,
well, you make a very good point, actually, that not everybody will know about the Gurkha Regiment, and I've fallen straight into the trap of thinking, well, of course, everybody knows about the Gurkhas, but it's a fascinating story, isn't it, to learn that they were initially engaged in battle against the British East India Company. And I feel an air of discomfort, really, in both a mutual, respectful relationship, but equally rather strained one when it comes to how we deal with the Gurkhas as veterans in this country, which was a big news story.
Yes. So basically, the British Army, the Gurkhas have fought alongside the British Army for over 200 years.
Yeah.
But the British first encountered them in 1814 when the British East India Company was fighting against them during the Anglo-Nepalese War. But the British forces were quite taken by how fearless the Gurkhas were with their abilities, and they were also very, very honorable. And in 1850, it was the first time that they basically recruited to fight alongside them. And so basically the Gurkhas fought alongside them all the way through to World War I, World War II, the Falklands. So the conflict in Malaya, which was from 1948 to 1960, was the first time in which the Gurkhas fought as part of the British Army.
Right.
And they were integral in, during the fighting in the Falklands, and they played a key role actually in Afghanistan and Iraq. I don't want to step on any sort of social or political landmines here, but the Gurkhas were promised, I don't know if they were promised benefits, citizenship, all sorts of things. And a lot of that didn't come to pass. And so I think it was during the 1960s that the Gurkha Welfare Trust was set up.
Yeah.
And basically to provide benefits. But most of the Gurkhas, the veterans, live in Nepal, not in England.
And the women are pretty much based in Nepal, aren't they?
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, it's important to point out that this is a regiment that's a male regiment. So there's definitely the family that are left behind and the men who go to fight.
Yes.
Have you met any of the women in the Gurkha communities yet?
No. So because of this great introduction, I was able to speak with the director of the Gurkha Welfare Trust and basically told him what I was hoping to do, which is to shine a light on the women's side of the story there. And he said to me that basically they've been wanting to tell this story as well.
Wow.
So in trade for giving me access for a week, I'll be going with their team into different hill tribes for a week. It will be based in Pokhara. And so in trade for my access that they'll be giving me, I'll be giving them the usage of any of the photographs I take. I'm still shooting my film, my Tri-X film.
I know.
with my ancient Nikons. And then, obviously if they want me to write, some sort of story that they, publish online, I would do whatever they want, again, in trade for the access.
I wonder whether the incredibly important tradition that the Gurkha communities have might affect what you will be told. This is a very proud community, one where I would imagine there's an element of secrecy in this honourable approach that they have.
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea. Again, it's been my experience that everybody wants to have their story told and somebody to hear it. I come without judgment. I don't have an agenda that's political or, I'm not casting aspersions. Again, there's no judgment. Who's good, who's bad, who's right, who's wrong. I mean, I try to come in as a neutral storyteller. I just want to know what these women have gone through. I mean, there may still be some war widows from World War II.
Yeah.
What has their life been like? What, the mothers who lost sons in Afghanistan, Iraq, the Falklands. And now there's aging veterans who also, female family members have to take care of them.
Well, let's join this together with the Kickstarter project that I want to talk about. Now, I know the Kickstarter project has taken a slightly different turn to the one that perhaps you would have hoped. However, aside from that, you put together a project for Kickstarter that was to enable you to do exactly what?
Well, I was hoping to raise funds towards my photographic expenses. As I mentioned, I still shoot film. Yeah. So I anticipate taking between 80 and 100 rolls of Tri-X with me, black and white film.
Wow.
My trusty ancient Nikons. Film is costly. Developing is costly. I do high-res digital scans of a selected edit of images. I also will make fiber gelatin prints of some of these, which will end up in the greater One Person Crying traveling exhibition. So that's, a large chunk of change. Yeah. And also, any help, it's been a lean couple of years thanks to the pandemic. And so, any support towards travel expenses is welcome. So that was the Kickstarter, was to hopefully cover some of these expenses. I mean, mainly the photographic and then some of the travels. But I didn't reach my target. I reached about 30% of it. It's better than nothing.
But it works in a different way to some of the other crowdfunding, doesn't it? I mean, this one is an all or nothing.
Yeah, and I knew that going in. I was working with a lovely tech guy who has helped me put it all together. And we had talked about doing a GoFundMe, but that was a lot less sort of user-friendly in terms of an arts-based project.
But the difference being GoFundMe, you would collect whatever is...
You get what you get, right?
Yeah.
It's not all or nothing.
No.
But the Kickstarter is geared towards more creative projects. So it's actually easier to build the site.
And your experience with Kickstarter has been, I know you haven't reached this time what you wanted to, but your experience with them has been...
It's been fine. I don't know how people receive it on the other end, because it is considered crowdfunding. I don't know what the mentality is. I was a bit surprised how few people pledged from my email list. I have over 700 people on my email list, and we got 28 pledges. So I don't understand why. Again, no judgment. If people just don't like crowdfunding, or people are busy, or they just didn't click through, or what. It's a bit of a mystery to me.
But do you have an opportunity to pick up from those that did?
Yes. So I would say all except for a few small, many donations were people I know.
Yeah.
So today and tomorrow I'll be sending out personal emails, seeing if they still want the book or the photograph or the photo session that they've pledged, and then I'll send them an alternate payment request. So, and hopefully they'll still come through.
Well, let's move back to the positive side of you traveling out there, because you're going regardless.
Yes.
With all your Tri-X. Have you never been, by the way, just even half tempted to think, can I possibly use digital and post-process in a way that it looks like my famous Tri-X? You probably haven't.
No. It's not just the film part for me. It's actually how I work as a photographer. Digital. I have digital cameras. I have a Leica Q. I have Canon Mark II, 5D Mark IIs, but I like my digital cameras. I don't love them, but I find with the digitals, I'm still always half a brain, in the technical side of it and the electronic side of it. Whereas when I'm working with my old Nikons, they're about as rudimentary as you get. I'm the autofocus. I just set the ASA, f-stop, and shutter speed, and boom. And I think for me, when I'm actually working, I don't think about my cameras. I mean, they're just my tools. Yeah. And so I feel I can be more immersed in the situation, whether it's creative, emotional, and also, the cameras are fairly unobtrusive. So I feel I can physically get close to my subject without feeling like I'm shoving something huge in their face. So no, but I'm just comfortable. I mean, they're so familiar to me.
Do you tend to use just one focal length as well?
Yeah, I mean, I have fixed lenses. So one camera will always have a 28 millimeter.
Right.
And then the other, I'll pivot between a 50 and a 35, and that's it.
But somebody who likes to work quite close with people, aren't you?
Yeah. I mean, being physically close is also, you have to open yourself up. You have to allow somebody into your space. Yeah. And hopefully the reciprocal happens where they allow me into their space. And I think for me, that's also been a part of my ability in gaining trust or connecting emotionally, because you're not detached. If you're halfway across a room, there's still a kind of a detachment. Whereas if I'm leaning into somebody, I also have to allow them into me, which basically says I'm asking them to let me into them in a sense. So, yeah.
I would imagine the friendships you form in good and bad circumstances are the most powerful currency for you. And I feel maybe currency is not the appropriate word here, but it's the one I have. But no wonder you find it so hard to leave the places you visit.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to Nepal a few times. I absolutely love it there. Yeah. Because I'm so open and vulnerable, again, because we're talking about topics that are also familiar to me: war, loss, grief, trauma, family. There's no veneers. There's no masks. In your daily life, you can sort of waft in or out of people, or, you're talking superficially, with my greengrocer or something, but there it's so emotionally charged. And again, I think because of my own family history and compassion. The flip side is that I've probably had some of the most incredible, heartwarming, meaningful moments imaginable. I mean, when I was in Vietnam in Hue, I met a Vietnamese woman who was a student activist during the war. I didn't realize there was an anti-war movement in Vietnam on the universities there. Oh. I mean, I never knew this. Anyway, she was arrested, thrown into a horrific prison, beaten. I think she was there 2 or 4 years. She was a journalist. She was a journalist on her school paper. So she's telling me her story, and we're chatting through a translator. And as I was leaving, but we somehow bonded. And as I was leaving, she gave me a hug. I thought she was going to crush my spine. It was like the most intense hug I've probably ever had, but for her and for me as an American, it was remarkable. I mean, the whole trip to Vietnam, I was ashamed to be an American because of what we perpetrated there. And yet I never encountered a minute of any anti-American sentiment. No. And I think that hug from her was like, it capped it, like, wow. But it's happened in other places. In Bosnia, it happened. This woman, Zifa, who I met at Potokari, the cemetery in Srebrenica, I don't know, I just went up to her and I liked her. And turns out she lost her husband, her son, and she was a weaver. And so she was weaving carpets. So I ended up the next day going to her home. And anyway, a hug like I've never had before. Yeah. Or a Syrian woman who I met in Jordan in 2018, Muna, and she lost everything. Her home in Damascus blown up, family. She was adopted, the daughter of some neighbors who the parents were killed, and the daughter was really badly injured and sent to Jordan, and she adopted her. And I don't know, she was joking. She had really beautiful eyes, kind of flirtatious eyes. And she says, because I said, oh, you're so beautiful. I said, your eyes are so beautiful. She said, oh, my eyes. She said, my eyes have gotten me into trouble. And I said to her, I've had the same problem. And so we cracked up and started laughing with each other. And I said to her, I can't believe you're laughing. And she said, well, if I didn't laugh, I would be dead. So to me, I can't explain what these moments have meant to me. They've meant the world to me. I wouldn't change them for a second.
Well, good luck for the seconds that are due to come and the emotional journey, physical and mentally, that's going to be. By the way, we talked about this last time, but I encourage anyone and everyone to go and look at the stories you made about your Atlantic ship crossings that we've already covered, I know. But if you do make another, I'd like to hear her now say, can I come along as your assistant? If that's not too inappropriate, but because that's an incredible story too, isn't it?
Yes, the crossing and the Atlantic Ocean. I think I missed the ocean like a limb, and I have to figure out a way to get back on the ship. I know I keep going to the Cunard website, and I'm like, okay, can I figure out how to do this crossing? So I haven't time-wise, and now that I'm fully really engaged in really starting my life here in London, which, as I said earlier, I feel like this week is the true beginning of everything. So yeah, eventually I'll get back on, but yeah, of course.
Oh, by the way, what is your favourite Italian restaurant? Just in case all of us fancy hanging out there one day.
So it's it's a classic Italian restaurant, but it's in walking distance to my flat. Right. It's on Lower Sloane Street in Chelsea, and it's called Carafini.
Carafini.
Yeah, a lot of very interesting people. Lunch there, dinner there. The staff couldn't be nicer. They're sort of like my family in a way. And yeah, it's just a really relaxed, it's elegant but not stuffy. It's not overpriced, but it's just yummy. And
I'm so pleased you said Carafina and you didn't say something like Pizza Express and Sloane Square.
Right. Well, yes, I'm trying to watch my figure. So.
And my thanks to Marissa Roth. It was so lovely to welcome her back on the show, like an old friend of both of ours now, I hope you feel. Oi, Neil, less of the old, I can hear Marissa chastising me now. No, I didn't mean old, I meant stop now, Neil. You're only going to make it worse. But actually, in a roundabout way, that's partly what tomorrow's first flight of the Diary show, now renamed The Extra Mile, is about. As tomorrow we're talking, mainly about two things. The wonderful enabler that photography is. It's a conversation. It's certainly a phrase that I use quite often, but I wanted to write something about that. And I recount some thoughts while sitting in Oslo's super sustainable airport at Oslo. Or more specifically, Jamie Oliver's deli in Oslo's super sustainable airport. Very Norwegian of you, Neil. Yes, you might have gathered by now. I've made a magic transition during all this back to the UK. So I'm sort of referring back to something that's coming tomorrow. God, this is like time travel, isn't it? And then I'm left pondering. So this is another thing. I'm still writing it as you hear these words, funnily enough. But I've just remembered, I have to tell you about the world's strangest statues. I made some pictures. They're on the departures level at the airport. And one of them makes me feel a sense of discomfort whenever I photograph it. In a kind of, I suppose, humorous way. Intriguing, Neil. Tell me more. Nope, all will be revealed. Or in this case, very revealed tomorrow. But also on the Extra Mile, I want to talk about retirement. I like to think that I'm a way away from having to even consider retirement. But then, regardless of the fact fiscally, I might be of a generation, time and post-COVID community of people that actually are entirely unable to now consider retirement as any kind of option. Jigsaw's intravenous Horlicks and Test Match Special on repeat might not be a choice that I have. But regardless of that, 5 words, do I really want to? Is retirement ever an option for people who are creative? Do we ever stop? Why would we want to? It's a question I ended last week's show with when I spoke with Kieran Doherty. So I'll revisit that because I had an additional chat with Marissa after the tape stopped rolling, as it were, about this topic as well, which I want to share with you, my extra milers, on our Patreon channel. Now, a postscript for the show ahead of our play-out song from one of my favourite artists. Would that be Maya Isakovits, Neil? Well, yes. You read my mind, it is. And she'll sing us out with Soul Changing in a moment. But prior to that, I'd like to invite our guest today, Marissa Roth, to provide a PS, our postscript to the show, some final thoughts ahead of tomorrow's Extra Mile about being let's just call it mature creative. What lessons has she taken from this wonderful life of storytelling? And she left me with the following quote, which I think is a perfect PS.
I'd like to share one of my favorite quotes. It happens to be from the Buddha. And the quote is, "In the end, only 3 things matter: how gently you live, how much you love, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you."
My eyes are wide open. I see you clear. My toes touch the same floor our world has been shaking on. Oh, what's your soul saying? Oh, is your world changing? Oh, what's your soul saying? Oh, is your world changing? Your face tells me always things your mouth often spares. And I hope you know I do what it takes to bring joy into your day. Oh, what's your soul saying? Oh, is your world changing? Oh, what's your soul saying? Oh, is your world changing? Oh, my eyes are wide open. I see you clear. My toes touch the same floor our world has been shaking on. What's your soul saying? Oh, is your world changing? Oh, what's your soul saying? Oh, is your world changing?
That's Maya Isakovits. And that's it for this week. My thanks Marissa Roth, Mark Power, Kieran Doherty and Sean Tucker. you for your letters and mpb.com, plus those who are our extra milers or patrons. It may take a few weeks to get used to that. If you want to support the show, you can through the link on the website, photowalk.show. If you do visit our website, remember to clear the cache for the site, and you'll see all the links pop up properly. And remember the new email, which is stories@photowalk.show. Oh, and not so much stop press, but an addendum to something I said earlier. All the links will work properly throughout the site. There's no needing to spend hours going back fixing them all. Marissa is back on Monday to set our assignment for a new week. Music today from the wonderful artlist.io. And if you're a filmmaker or photographer who makes slideshows, it's a fabulous resource, and you'll find a link to that on our website as well. There are a lot of VIPs, very important photographers, who help out with this project by the ideas and letters sent in, and I want to mention 3 who give particular production support. Neil Ford, for your understanding of the tech that he knows I don't, particularly this week as we've been going through lots of changes with the rebranding. Emily Renier for your eyes in our Facebook group, and Andrea Gilpin for making sure Instagram is engaging. And very soon we're going to be talking about Vero. Yes, you may well have seen some films. Peter McKinnon made one in particular about swapping his love of Instagram for a love of Vero. And we're going to be talking about that picture app as well. I look forward to photographing with you, hearing from you, and talking with you next time.
The Photo Walk is a Loading Zone production.